Well, here's another old radio project that I'm undertaking for a friend of mine. It's an old Crosley Model 655 Tombstone, I guess they call these guys, kind of floor standing model. Beautiful cabinet. It looks like it's been restored in the past, although my friend says it's not functioning. As you can see, the cabinet looks really nice. Certainly that's been restored. Let's take a look here. Top of it looks very good too, although a little fading here in darker and lighter areas. I'm not sure what's causing that, but cabinet looks very nice. Okay, looking at the back here, now certainly looks pretty original. It's got the old electrodynamic speaker in it, and there's the chassis. The chassis is pretty dusty, but there's signs that maybe it's been restored in the past. All the tubes are cleaned off because I just pulled them all out to test them in this really nice TV7DU tube tester that also belongs to the same friend who owns the radio. So I borrowed his tube tester and just tested all the tubes, and they all tested out really good. So it's another indication maybe that this has seen some work in the past. Certainly the chassis is very dusty, so might go ahead and pull that out and look underneath and see if it's had some been recapped in the past too. But so far, I mean, you can see the grill. So the grill cloth looks like maybe it's been replaced. Certainly the exterior of the cabinet has been refinished. And this capacitor right here, that looks like a modern one that's been put in there. And you know, the tubes, of course, tested out very good. So certainly looks like it's had some work in the past. I downloaded the schematic, so I'll have some reference here, what to look at. So next step is go ahead and pull in the chassis out and see what the underside looks like. Alright, I got the Crosley radio out of its out of the cabinet, and decided to bring the chassis down here to the basement workshop because of some of the things I discovered. You know, I was saying it looked like it had been worked on before, and if you take a look at the speaker, you can see it's had some tears, I think, in the you know, in the paper cone, and it looks like it's been restored with a little bit of tissue paper and some glue. Not sure that that's really sufficient. I noticed as I moved the cone in and out, I was hearing some clicks and cracks. I think some of this tissue paper and glue is kind of cracking a little bit, so might have to clean that up a little bit, make it sound better. I think, you know, as long as the voice coil is okay, it might be okay. We'll have to evaluate that as time goes on, but it's definitely an old electrodynamic speaker, you know, with the output transformer attached to the basket. And there's and look at that. Boy, I wish I could get a picture of that, but that's what the old spiders used to look like. And let me see if I can get that with a flashlight better. I don't know if you can see that on the video, but it's definitely, that's why they call them spiders, because they had all these little legs that went out in all different directions and looked like a spider to the early speaker folks, I guess. And this is about the earliest one I've ever seen, so that's the first one I've seen in person where the spider actually looks like a spider. Again, the chassis is pretty dirty, but I think at one time it had been cleaned up, and all the tubes tested great, so no problems there. Unfortunately, when you pull the chassis over, you can see some issues here. Number one being, here's an old capacitor is just kind of hanging in the breeze there. Not sure where that's supposed to connect up to. But you can see signs that someone's been in here, because here's some new yellow capacitors that have been replaced. So it's been partially recapped. Then you look and there's some old, very crusty looking old wax paper capacitors that are still in there. That's an old electrolytic, it looks like. Another wax paper back there. Some more down there. So apparently it was partially recapped at one point, and I think probably the capacitors that didn't get replaced or now have probably failed, and that's maybe why the unit isn't working anymore. Certainly it's not because of the tubes, because all the tubes tested great. I have not powered this thing up, and I won't until I replace these, because those scare me. Those are pretty ugly looking. So that's probably the next step. I'll go ahead and clean it up some more, try to figure out what those capacitor values are that have not been replaced, and order them up and put new ones in. Now I might try to do something a little different than I normally do. Since I'm working on this for a friend, I think I'm going to go ahead and try to post a couple of YouTube videos early before the restoration is done so he can see the progress, and then I'll just keep updating the video as time goes on. I haven't tried that before, but I think you can do that on YouTube, so we'll see. So that's where we are so far. Alright, I've got all the, I wanted to test the output transformer to see if it's in good shape. So I've got all the tubes pulled out of the unit, and I've got it run through the isolation transformer. Got the variac set at about 110 volts. And I've got it running through the dim bulb tester, which, you know, it's not pulling any current really, so the bulb isn't even lit up yet. And you see, you got the lights of the dial illuminated, so it looks like we got some voltage. So let's take a look here and see what we've got. On the 5Z4 rectifier tube, if I check these two pins here, you can see I've got 5.1 volts, which is the heater current, or heater voltage on that particular device. And then the bulbs, I believe, run at the 6 volt. So let's see what they are, if I can get on. So we're reading 7 volts, so yeah, that's roughly the 6 volt rating. Now back on the 5Z4 rectifier tube, at some point I should get a high voltage here between the pins, and there I've got 289 volts. That's the two plates, I believe. So we have high voltage coming out of the transformer. We have 5 volts, and then we have 6 volts going to the rest of the tubes and to the little bulbs. So it looks like the power transformer is good. All the tubes are good so far. So maybe just you know, recapping the caps that haven't been replaced will make this thing work again. Well, I've been taking a look at this old Crosley radio and kind of evaluating what's been done to it and what needs to be done. Now, one thing I noticed here is that this capacitor can on the outside has obviously been replaced. I noticed in a picture of an old other one, the original one was real tall. So this one's been popped in, and the concern here is that you can see that those are 3 40 microfarad capacitors, and it's supposed to be, if you read it right in here, it's those are supposed to be 8 microfarad capacitors, so they're way larger than what they should be. So more to come on that. Now you flip it over here, and of course you got this capacitor here flopping in the breeze. That one looks like is this on the IF amplifier. I think that is this little cap here, which is connected to the cathode. So the cathode capacitor is no connect. Now also on this can, which is right down in there, you can see it's the type that has 3 capacitors in it, an A and a B and a C, and the grounds, the negative side on all 3 of those are tied together and tied to ground, which, you know, that is connected to ground. But here's those 3 capacitors over here, these 10 Y, X, Y, and Z capacitors. And you can see this 10X and 10Y, they do connect up here to ground. That big dark bold line is a ground point. But this other one here, this 10Z, neither side of it connects to ground. You know, one side connects to you know, the cathode of the rectifier. The other side connects to this resistor voltage divider, looks like. So that can't be right. You know, that part just does not work with this application. So I can imagine if this thing ever worked, it would probably have some pretty bad you know, ripple on the output, because you know, that's capacitor is just not in the right place. So I ordered 3 individual 8 microfarad electrolytic capacitors to go ahead and clean up that mess. So I'll leave that capacitor in there, even though it's not the right one, just to plug the hole. And then I'll go ahead and wire up the electrolytics back here properly and see if we can make it work right. Guess that's what happens sometimes when you are working on a radio that other people have already worked on. You never know what you might find. Here's a couple of safety and protection options that we can do to this old Crosley radio. That's the 5Z4 where the rectifier tube goes. Now what I've been hearing is if for some reason that tube shorts out, that's going to draw a whole lot of current, and it's going to probably smoke that irreplaceable power transformer right there, or very hard to replace power transformer. So to prevent that, what's generally been recommended from what I've seen is to put in a little fuse here in line, and these didn't come with fuses originally. I guess the manufacturers of the radio figured if that function ever failed like that, it would just you'd replace the radio. I'm sure back in 1935 they didn't figure these radios would be around in the 21st century, but they still are. And those power transformers are hard to come by, so this will, if that ever happens, that fuse will blow and protect your power transformer. Another thing too is right there, you can see that capacitor is going actually from the transformer to ground. That's a 0.01. That's the so-called death capacitor. And where it is in the circuit is right here. You can see it goes you know, from the primary of the transformer, which is at line voltage. You know, there's the switch right there, so it's right after the switch, and it's going to ground, which is that dark line right there. So I circled that and said, well, that's kind of where you should use a safety capacitor. And nowadays they have these specialized capacitors that are designed to go across AC, which I have a couple of them here. There's one that I've used in my old turntable, and I bought a couple of extras. That's a 68 nanofarad, or 0.068 microfarad. And here's the one we actually need. This I originally got from my old 70s vintage Akai stereo receiver. and it's a 0.01 at 250 volts, and it's it's a ceramic disc safety type capacitor. So since that matches what is supposed to be in there, I think I'm going to take that capacitor out, which somebody has already replaced, and put one of these safety caps in. And I'm not sure, I know they're designed for AC, to go across AC line. I'm not sure what is safe about them, except for maybe if they fail open, or they don't catch on fire or something. But I figure if that's what modern electronics is using, that's probably what would work best here. So I'll go ahead and put one of those in there, and I've already got the fuse in for when I get the rest of the capacitors that I can update and get this thing fired up. Now the soldering iron is heating up because I just got the capacitor order in. I ordered one of these kind of pre-World War II capacitor collections. I figured I'd be working on these, more and more of these, I hope anyway. I ordered those from Just Radios. Nice folks from up in Canada. Gotta support those Canadians. May have to move up there one of these days. So there's the radio. I'll go ahead and start soldering some of these in, and we'll see what happens. Got my glass of black IPA there, so ready to get going. Soldering iron is up to temp.
I think here more than ever.
Well, I got the radio completely recapped here, at least all the old capacitors that hadn't been replaced before. Here's a little bag of paper capacitors that I replaced with some orange dips, and there's some other axial lead capacitors that have already been done. And there's the three electrolytics that I replaced that electrolytic can capacitor that wasn't the proper one. So you can hear that I've got sound. I'm tuning in a radio station. It's sounding not too bad, but I noticed when I crank up the voltage a little bit, I'm kind of losing the signal a little.
That's right.
So might go through and check all the voltages here, plate voltages and grid voltages and everything, and see what's going on, make sure everything is proper inside the radio. I hear that sounds kind of bad. I'll crank this down a little bit and improves the sound. So I'll investigate that. But at least it's bringing in a radio station, and not sounding too bad. Sounding good. Even that old speaker, as ugly as it is, it's kind of sounding okay. Well, I brought the old Crosley radio up here to upstairs so I could put it close to my little AM broadcast radio station and get a nice strong signal. Just got a wire hooked to the antenna. It drapes over here. And I'm playing Pandora into the radio station, and the radio's sounding great. Got good volume. Here's the tone control. So it's got two switch positions. There's bass and there's treble. The only issue I had after the recapping is the volume control is a little scratchy, but not bad. And I think there was some bad contacts in some of the tubes, so I wiggled them around to where they made better contact. So it's sounding great right now. I think I'll go ahead and put it back in the cabinet and maybe call it good. Even that old speaker, as ugly as it is, got a pretty nice sound. Probably sound better once it's back in the cabinet, get a better bass response. So that's the next step.
Rogers in the 25th century. Buck Rogers is on the air, brought to you by the makers of Popsicle, Fudgicle, and Creamsicle, those delicious frozen confections on a stick. And now a message from the famous fellow who won the contest for the typical American boy, Popsicle Pete.
Say, kids, seems like everybody's saving bags from Popsicle, Creamsicle, and Fudgicle and getting the dandiest free gift.
Well, the old Crosley's sounding pretty good. I'm broadcasting an old episode of Buck Rogers through streaming on the laptop down to the AM radio station, and then picking it up on 900 kilohertz
I ever
here.
saw it.
And remember,
Sounds great.
everything that goes into these great, big, luscious confections is the freshest and the finest.
The
kind of
radio
ingredients
looks
Mother
great,
uses in
so
her own
I guess I'll give it back to
Popsicle,
my
Fudgicle,
buddy,
Creamsicle
and
as often as you like.
hopefully
They help
he'll
make you
enjoy it
strong,
for years
but
to come.
Be sure you get the genuine. Look for the name Popsicle, Creamsicle, or Fudgicle printed on every bag.
Save bags for free gifts every day. Save your gift list, too.
Well, I thought I was done with this radio, but I noticed the volume control. When you tap on it, it's got some, definitely got some bad contacts in there. So I'm going to have to take this thing back apart and see if I can get some deoxit in that pot for the volume control and clean that up. So back apart again. Oh well. Well, I got the volume control fixed up with deoxit, but it's working fine now. But sometimes, you know, you fix one thing and something else breaks or goes bad. So now you can see how the radio comes on, plays well, and then just kind of fades out. So I don't know. I think something else has failed, so it's time for the radio to come back out of the cabinet again, and we'll probe around and try to figure out what's going on. So back down to the basement again. Well, I've been taking a look at the old Crosley radio here, and was measuring all the voltages on all the tubes, and everything was actually a little high, but I think it's because the current voltage now is like 124 volts down in my basement instead of the old 110 or 15 that these were originally made for. So everything looked good, but you know, when you turn this thing on, I'll show you what happens. When it first warms up, it plays, and you get that racket, and it goes out. So what I have found by just poking around and touching the thing is that if you put your finger on the grid input to the IF amplifier coming out of the first IF can, it lets the radio play perfectly. So what I've been investigating lately is that I think what's happening is my finger's just adding some capacitance, you know, to this connection here. See, I let go of it and it goes out. Touch it. Now these IF cans have a little mica capacitor down on the bottom of them, and apparently those go bad often on these real old sets. You got to pull the can apart and remove those capacitors, and then install new ones on the bottom side of the can. So I think that's what I'm going to have to do to make this work right. But I'm going to have to watch some more YouTube videos on how to do it, and get a little video experience there, and then maybe I'll give it a try. But everything else on the radio is working great. So there we go. Well, here's the update on the latest on the radio. I got it working, and originally I was thinking maybe I was having trouble with that IF can, and I was really not wanting to tear into that because from what I've seen they're a bit of a pain to work on. And I was noticing that when this thing was losing the radio signal, it was always right after the tubes came up to temperature. So I kept thinking maybe it's a tube issue rather than a IF can problem. And you can see these have the little trimmer capacitors right down in there, where the ones that seem to be having a problem were the ones with the adjustable slugs, and then it had the capacitors actually built in. So I was thinking maybe it was more of a tube issue than a capacitor issue. So what I did is, it's actually a 6K7 normally that's in that spot, and it's actually this tube here is normally there. That's a 6K7G, which is the RF version, I guess. And that's the standard 6K7, which is usually an audio tube. So I just swapped these two, and then I had to lengthen the wires here that connect to the grids because they wouldn't reach. But it's playing just fine with those two reversed. Now the first time I fired it up, I noticed that after maybe about 10 minutes, I lost amplitude on that one suspected bad tube right there. That's normally the one that was over here in the IF amplifier stage that was losing gain right away. So the loss of gain seems to have moved, over to the audio side. Right now it's playing fine. So I'm assuming just the way it's biased in the two positions maybe are causing it to work in one and not in the other. But that seems to be the issue, is that that one tube, that's the 6K7 that's normally in the IF amplifier position, has generated a heat temperature, heat issue. As soon as it comes up to temperature, at least in this position, is losing gain. So I'm going to go ahead and order another one of those. They're only about $3, and put it in here and see if that permanently solves the issue. But right now it's working fine without the trick of touching the grid input. So that's the latest. I received the new 6K, is it 6K7 IF amplifier tube, and got it installed. Here's the old one that was acting up. So the radio is playing very well now. I've been playing it for a couple hours, and great sound. So about ready to button this up again. It's got this can cover that goes over top of that tube, so I'll put that back on. And this wire has gotten a bit frayed, so I need to cover that with some type of non-conductive coating so it doesn't short out against the top of that can. But I think I'll go ahead and do that and put this back in the cabinet and probably call it good.
Mark Twain wrote The Connecticut Yankee just short of 60 years ago. And the Yankee he wrote about was a typical last century American. A foreman of iron workers in a Hartford gun foundry. But suppose old Mark were alive and kicking as usual today, at this moment. How would he choose his hero here in the year of our Lord 1947? And how would he begin his strange tale? Well, if I were Mark, I can imagine I might begin.
Well, it's I guess the Crosley radio is going to be working okay. Been playing it for an hour or two and without a hiccup. Sounds great. So I think we're going to call this one done and listen to a old rebroadcast of Ford's Theater from 1947.
Armor in the center of the hall, when I noticed a quiet, serious-looking young man beside me. Leaning forward a little, he read the